On Chris Evans TV, we have Dani LaMartina back again. She's been on radio, and she's been training with me on YouTube videos. But I'm really excited. We're going to start a series of conversation because she is easily one of the most intelligent individuals I've ever met in the space of getting better with the human body. And I thought, I jokingly told you I want to call this the brain and the bro.
Dude, that was perfect though.
Right, right. And what really spurred this is all of the garbage negativity that's going around our industry with science-based lifting versus, for lack of a better word, just meathead lifting or anecdotal lifting is probably the better technical term for that, right? Is what was taught to me is passed down to the next generation and vice versa. And as I told you before we hit record, is I've probably done a poor job of presenting myself as to almost be like the opposite of what I'm seeing now and kind of pushing back on this heavy-handed science approach to lifting weights because initially I don't find that to be very intriguing or fun. And what has always driven my ship in the weight room, at the dinner table, at learning bodybuilding and getting better is the ability to go in there and have the most fun of my day. And I think a lot of times it paralyzes this new generation because they're so scared to do the wrong thing because they're looking for the most optimal.
Hmm.
It's I'm really excited to bring you on because, as I said, like you and I usually come to the same conclusion, but it's at a very different perspective, which I love. So let's start here, Dani, with the first question is in a perfect world, wouldn't both of these worlds mesh and work together as opposed to as opposition?
I think you and I gosh, I wish that we could have recorded some of the conversation that we had before we started, because I think a lot of this is that our brain should be used to think critically in order to move us forward, right? And so I don't know about you, but one of the things that I've seen in a lot of people who are too science-based and almost like fearful of doing like the quote wrong thing, is that there's a lack of motivation. And the thing is, like, all that negativity will beat us down. And so if we even just look at the science of motivation, there are core pillars to that. There are, in a very basic sense, there are three, but if you really go into the neuroscience, there are five. But the three basic ones are, gosh, there's like a sense of autonomy, a sense of mastery, and a sense of curiosity.
Yep.
And that like fear-based one or the other totally erodes those kind of three pillars of actually being motivated to go and do something.
Yes.
You and I are both of the same mindset that at the end of the day, like going and moving forward and doing something is going to be the best way to actually grow muscle.
1000%. Because when I found bodybuilding, it was because I had a problem. The problem was I hated being skinny. So how can I fix this? And you know, when you and I began lifting, there wasn't this large vast internet. I couldn't go on Instagram because there was no such thing and say, "Oh, I want a big chest or back or legs," or "I just want to be a freak." Like, how do I do that? And it was even before YouTube, so it wasn't like I could go search a video and say, "Okay, this is how I get huge." Even if it's the wrong way, I could watch a video and do it. So
Right.
it became the situation where, okay, cool, I need a gym membership. Awesome. This is where my buddies go. I'm going to go with them. Cool. All right. You get in there, we lift weights. We lifted all the weights.
Some of the things that you were telling me that you did, that you've done over the years, I'm like, gosh, yeah.
Right. And I'll give you guys an example. We would do chest. We would do incline dumbbell, incline barbell, flat dumbbell, flat barbell, decline barbell, all the hammer strength pieces. Now let's go do flies.
Or even like you were saying at one point, you just like would walk around the gym holding a plate with the ankles dorsiflexed, just
Yes.
because you really wanted that anterior tips. You're like, great, what can we do for this?
Right.
Like a science to go and like, oh, this is how you train the anterior tip. No, you saw Jay Cutler do a quad stomp and you said, well, gee, he's sitting there with his toes pulled up. Maybe I'll just go do that and load it.
Right. Again, I don't know. We used to call them duck walks. And I don't even know why we call them duck walks. That's not how a duck walks. But we would train the piss out of the calf raise and then go grab 45-pound plates and just walk around the gym and see who could hold their toes flexed north or dorsiflex if you want to be fancy, as long
Yeah.
as you can take the pain. And
Yeah.
after 2 or 3 laps, it would be excruciating. And we're like, oh, cool, it's got to work, right? It's burning. So
Yeah.
it's really interesting to me. Like I learned very anecdotally. It was if one of the big guys saw how hard I was squatting, they were like, "Oh, hey, like you start with a head nod." And next thing you know, they're like, "Hey, Chris, like if you want a big chest, get off that flat bench." Yes, sir. What should I do instead? Get on the incline and we'll do dumbbells and barbell pressing. Okay, got it. Yes, I can do that. And it was like that's
Mm.
how we learned that, coupled with reading Flex and Muscular Development, buying, and then I eventually got into buying like Ronnie Coleman's DVD, Jay Cutler, all the top pros, and then we would just mimic their workouts. And for years I did that. And that's how I learned, I would say, like the ground level of bodybuilding. And then I had a guy who was a freak take me under his wing and say, "Hey, let me really teach you how to eat and let me teach you how to apply everything you're trying to apply." So that led me into college where other people started to say, "Oh man, like you really made a lot of progress. Like I want to train with you." Okay, cool. And then the guys who would train with me would start growing. And it's like, huh, this is fun. I think I should do this for a living. So
Yeah,
that was a natural progression for me. Is like, oh, cool. Like that's the optimal way to learn. And for lack of better words, it's fuck around and find out. Like,
yeah.
like, yeah,
And really hard is like, so that obviously there's a reason that everything works, right? And so what we're getting on the internet right now is we're getting so much overload that throws people into indecision, and there's a trust recession of the information. And then we combine that with the idea that, in marketing, I don't know about you, but I'm always told like, oh, you got to use a negative hook. And I'm like, I don't want to put a negative on anyone. The fact that there's too much of that like shifts people into fear. So
yeah.
there's a statistic that's like 80% of people, if you give them an option, like if you induce a fear, 80% of people are going to choose a safe option, even if it sucks,
Oh,
rather than do the new thing that might have a better outcome because they have the predictability.
right.
And so when all these like all these influencers, if you look at their hooks, it's never do this. Here's
Yes.
what's jacking up your diet. There's always a negative hook. And what that does to the human brain and our neurobiology is so wild. And so there's such there's a trust recession of so much of the information that we're getting. And I think when you and I were coming up, it was just kind of like, we just try it and you learn by experience. And that does something neurobiologically very different to our brains to be immersed in something doing versus being told of fear. And that's not just like a woo-woo thing. That's like there are studies that support this. And like I think again, this is where you and I like really jive is like, yeah, like we have all the science, but it should complement what we already know. If there's a solution that works for someone, there's a reason for it.
Yeah.
So
You
one of the I've
so,
really gotten on this year, especially when it comes to like, choosing good movements for people. Like, how do we choose a movement that's going to bring up our quad or our rear delt or our side delt? Well, so and so says, do cable lateral raise one way, and someone says to do, a lying lateral raise. And which one, if I only get to do one, what do I do? Um, there are reasons that they both work. And
yeah,
I could go down a rabbit hole in terms of like, oh, structural bias and like how we're put together and attachment sites and all that. But at the end of the day, no one can tell you what's going to work best for you. We can provide suggestions. And this is one thing I love about working with you as an athlete is you're going to provide a suggestion. But if I say, hey, actually feels better this way, you'd be like, great, let me see a video and see if we can optimize that.
correct.
Um, I think that there's just so much, and you can probably attest to this too. There's so much of this black or white. You either do it this way or this way, and most of us are going to require a degree of granularity to find what works best for actually hitting the muscle. But we're so like fear-inducing that, ugh, enough of that shit. Go lift some weight.
Correct. The absolutist mindset to me is always very immature when it comes.
Mm,
And you've done an exceptional job educating me on the fact of like, hey, Chris, like pay attention to people's rib cage because it could drastically change how they need to perform an activity or how they can perform it. Meaning, can they do a side lateral the way I'm teaching it? Maybe yes, maybe no. And then on the end that you and I just talked about off camera was just referencing like someone's gas tank or their ability to push certain levels of threshold of oxygen debt aren't equal. And I said to you, like, it hurts my soul a little bit to know that people may be structurally at a disadvantage, and it's not weakness, and it's something that they need to work around, not through. So something you touched on two things that really is really striking to me. And I watched this firsthand with you when you came into town, is the first thing you did after I got you into Elite was you walked around like a kid in a candy store at Christmas and you were like, oh my God, he has this and he has this, and this is such a cool place. And I think even guys that fall on like the bro side of lifting, sometimes if they have to do something that is outside of what their normal is, their Cybex leg press that's loaded with 100-pound plates versus say a Life Fitness leg press that's loaded with 45-pound plates, and they have a conditioning. It's like, oh my God, what am I going to do the logbook?
Oh my gosh, right? I'm working with a guy right now who he's so convinced that he has to train to failure. He can only do like 10 work sets per session. Even like forearms and like biceps are trained to like failure in the 5 to 8 rep range. And I'm like and this guy's really, really smart. And that's the problem is he's so smart, he's afraid of making the wrong decision because he could see a justification for everything. So he's leaned so hard into science to tell him what to do. And I think that's probably where we can take a lot of the conversations is that at the end of the day, I think people are really smart. And as much as we want to joke about being dumb meatheads, it's like most of us can trust our gut feel. And that was something that you talked about off camera too, where you're like, this just feels awesome. I wish I had stayed with that
Yeah.
rather than saying, this one doesn't feel good. I just need to practice it. There's like a shame-inducing element with that I think people need to learn to trust themselves on what feels good and what doesn't, rather than, being dogmatic on, well, literature tells me, or some very, very opinion influencer tells me that this movement is pointless.
Yep, agreed.
Well, is it really? Or is it just that the way that they're shaped for them, that's pointless?
And this may be my first contention point as something you just talked about is, so let's say I see a study that says, hey, Chris, like you want to pack on the most amount of muscle to your posterior chain, it's got to be a deadlift from the floor. Okay, awesome. Going back to what you just talked about is what if their structure is different than mine, the individual that was tested or the individuals that were showing these results that now I'm taking for gospel. But when I pick up a deadlift off the ground, I feel it all my quads, hamstrings, and glutes. Weird. Like, so I always wonder when these people reference the studies, my first inkling to look at is who was the study conducted on? And the sad thing is there's no one like yourself, me, your husband, who is a 300-pound monster who's hadn't missed a meal in 6 years or more. There aren't studies on that. So why am I comparing myself to some frat bro who parties on the weekends and probably does blow off his girlfriend's ass? Like,
Exactly. Exactly.
like we might get lucky if he eats dino nuggets for dinner at the fucking
I
cafe.
know, right? Like he adds 50 grams of protein per day kind of thing.
Right, right. And like half of it's from peanut butter. Fuck.
But peanut butter is not protein? I didn't know that.
Right. Yeah, like I
Oh,
guess there are always things, right? Like, so if I'm gonna base my entire or take all of my trust and put it in science, why is the validity of who the tests are on not a valid argument from my standpoint? Because listen, I have thousands of case studies to show that what I do works.
Mhm.
And I know that might hurt some people's feelings because I realize that not every trainer or coach on the planet has worked with as many individuals as I have. But when I get talked down to by the science community, they have no idea what my background is. Like,
Right.
they don't know I hard trained people for 10 hours plus a day for a decade. And it ranged from professional athletes to a mom with 4 kids, like, or a grandma who can barely walk. Like,
Yeah.
I have no clue what I've seen, or that I worked in a PT clinic for 2 years and got to go all the back end or front end, how you ever want to look at that, before they came to me in the personal training world.
Right.
So it's really interesting that I just really would love for us to have a good conversation on both sides and like, hey, like, what can we learn from you and what can you learn from us? Kind of a mindset, as opposed to being hostile oppositions. It's
Yeah.
and I've seen so many intelligent people lean on those studies. I mean, think about the one we heard growing up where the human body can only digest 25 grams of protein at a time. Now that's been debunked by
Yeah.
multiple sources. So
Yeah.
you didn't have to tell you or I that if we ate north of 25 grams of protein, that we were going to grow. We did it and it worked.
Right. Right.
Shocker.
Well, I think too, like I probably tend to be I would be flayed by a lot of like clinicians because I rely a lot on, not rely on, I use a lot of bro science, just stuff that we know works, right? And so one of the things that I think is really interesting is we think strictly about the system of hypertrophy, right? Which is like great, like mechanical tension, blah, blah, blah. We don't think about that there are a whole bunch of like support systems that have to be on par in order to support mechanical tension. So like, great example. Um, if someone has been training their forearms to failure in the 6 rep range, what do you think that's done to the tendon? And then we look at that over time, right? Do you think that's going to affect their back training? And so what's really interesting is we look at even in chronic tendinopathy, there are changes to the nerve endings literally grow into the tendon.
Oh,
So
Jesus.
there's some, like really great. So there's like big changes that happen, right? But yet this guy wants to look at, well, the studies say I have to train this way for hypertrophy. Well, not even alone, like let alone from like this person is like not trained. There are a bunch of other subsystems that have to be in place. Does he even have the endurance throughout a lot of small stabilizing muscles for like, proper co-contraction if you want to get really nerdy to support an 8 rep range, or when you get into that rep range, do things start to fall apart because those muscles that, again, the support structures aren't built in.
Right.
So it's one of those things where like one of the things I love core programming because it includes a little bit of everything. And just to me as a PT, as a coach, as a scientist, whatever, as a doctor, I think we always have to think about the constructs or like the building blocks that go into something, right? So if we want to look at back training, what has to fall in line? We have to have good bracing. We have to have good mechanical movement through the shoulder blade. We have to have good grip strength. We have to have the ability to pronate and supinate at the elbow. Like there are all these building blocks that have to go into place. Each one of those building blocks is going to be held up by a different potential barrier. So bracing, for example, does the person even have the ability to brace without locking down everything? Because if you lock down everything, you can't move. Do they have the ability to find any sort of graded exposure to that? Because if they don't, that's going to change the system. So I don't know. I mean, the more I look at things, and you're probably like this too, the more you look at how many different people you've worked with, literally thousands, which very few people on this planet can say that's happened because you've worked for decades now. The more we realize that like there's no possible way that there is just one right way to do things because we can't possibly control all the other subsystems occurring.
Right. Yep. It's one of those things where,
On my TED talk.
oh no, I love it. I love it. That is the conversation that needs to be had, right? Is what is right for me may not be right for you. And that's very hard for anyone who wants a roadmap. Like, I feel like
Yeah.
people want to map quest this. And they're like, they forget that if on MapQuest or Google Maps, Apple Maps, whatever, if you hit traffic, they'll divert you. And they
Mm,
forget, like, it isn't A to B. Like,
that's such a good analogy.
yes, because we learn, we grow, we get better, we evolve. And when our body evolves, something has to change if we want to continue to see progress. And as you and I both know, it's not linear. Like we wish it was. If so, I would charge a lot more for my training and coaching for Christ's sake. Because I could say, oh, cool, in 6 months we'll be here, in 12 months we'll be here.
Yeah.
Doesn't um what to me is the fun of this, and I realize I'm not everyone. My personality loves to experiment with things and try things.
You're a thinker for sure.
Right. And as I told you, and anyone who knows me on a personal level knows this as well. I hate being told what to do. Like I'm not in prison. I don't like being trapped by that. If you if you tell me, hey Chris, like to do this, to fix your back or fix this issue, I need you to do this. Okay, cool. I can follow that directive because I trust you and I value your education and thought process. But at the same time, I'm gonna do it and then I'm gonna call you or text you and like, hey, this is what I felt, this is what's happening. Is that normal or is that what you wanted? Yes, cool. If it's yes, I'm going on the path and following it because it's working and I'm progressing. If I'm not, you and I are going to have a back and forth discussion on, okay, cool. When you do that breathing exercise, why does it feel like you're getting waterboarded? Oh, because you just need to do more of it. Okay, perfect. I can do that. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
That's how my brain works. And I realize that, again, not everyone is that way. Some people are so busy in life that they just want to be told, do X, Y, and Z, and that's going to be your best result. So maybe I had to come to terms with that a little bit.
Well, so the way I look at this, I just gave a talk at a conference a couple months ago, and I tried to kind of explain my system a little bit and like how I approach things because I think it's a good unique blend of science, but like you know me and you know that I always anything science related I do should lend towards hard training. Like that's why I'm going to use it.
Right.
Um, and I hope this provides some clarity for people who are just confused on like, well, why does this work for some people and not for others? And it's a word called a hierarchy. And what that means is basically that at any given point in time, there are multiple things that can be true at one time. And the order of which that vertical relationship, as well as horizontal relationships, that order can all change. So it might be the most important thing at one point in time is going to shift. And it really kind of creates this three-dimensional constellation. The idea of that hierarchy is really important because it asserts really a couple things. Number one, that multiple things can be true at once within one body,
Right.
not just off like, literature within like you.
Right.
It also basically asserts that that system is going to change. So what the answer is at one point in time isn't going to be the answer at another point in time. And inherently, like we know this, but I think people are afraid to go out on that limb because they do want direction. And I think as soon as we can really kind of like step back and appreciate that, like, okay, this isn't going to be the answer forever, but for right now, it feels really good.
Yeah.
I think that opens up a lot of freedom and kind of ameliorates the fear that makes people go, oh my God, I'm going to do the wrong thing. What do I do?
Yeah. You know, what you just said there was a huge point about you can have two different answers within the same body. And I know you and I have talked about this. Like if I'm speaking specifically about how I've progressed, I think anything would work for my quads and calves and shoulders. Brutally honest there. Things where I've had to dig my heels in and try to figure out has been very different. So arms, for example, I tried to be like, okay, cool. Everyone says do push pull legs. I'm going to do it. Guess what? My arms got worse. Okay. So cross that off the list. That doesn't work. I need a direct arm day. Okay, great. What feels incredible to me, higher volume, higher rep range, massive pumps, a lot of cable work, a lot of dumbbell work, or progressive overload where I'm beating the dog shit out of my elbows. Like,
Yeah.
oh, like, hey, Chris, like if you can skull crusher 225 with a straight bar, wouldn't your triceps be bigger? If you could put 345s on your waist and do dips, wouldn't that make your triceps bigger? It may make them bigger in the short run, but it's going to trash my elbows to where they're actually going to get smaller. So it forces people to have to, in my mind, like put a critical thinking hat on and be like, huh, okay, cool. Like if a majority of cables work for your arms, would your chest work that way? For me, no. My chest grew great off of dumbbells and barbells. But hold on, you just completely said it didn't work for your arms. Yeah, like that's because I'm allowing myself to have an open mind and realize, like, hey, my chest, I could train that 6 to 10 rep range and grow just fine. Arms, if I did that, I would be beat to shit like wrists, forearms, elbow,
Yeah.
and my arm's not getting any better. So that's a huge point. And again, I realize that you and I can say all these things with probably a combined 40, 50 years of experience. Like it's a lot easier for us to speak on that
Yeah.
than when we were younger in our career and thought very similar to the way some of these people think is I know the right way. Why aren't you listening? Like,
Well, I think it's interesting too that, again, like you're 40 now. It's
yeah,
wild.
yeah,
Um, Very few people can say like they'll say they've trained thousands of people. Very few people actually have. You actually have, right? And it's
right,
because you have this 22 years training people and then lifting longer.
right,
Um, I've turned 37 next month. I started working at a PT clinic when I was 15. So
right.
we literally have between the two of us like a lot of time. And I think what's really interesting too is that just as a consumer, we get into like, well, okay, well, what's right now? But for where you and I are at, we're kind of zoomed back out, like everything is cyclical.
Yeah,
Everything.
right,
Years ago, it was all about the logbook. Now people are like, oh no, quality. And it's like, that's going to come back to the logbook next year. Like,
right.
and so I think and you could probably see this too. The people who have the best progress are the people who, rather than looking for like the right answer, just can actually kind of think for a second. Like, oh, okay, I'm using an incline barbell. Man, I have like a good pump after that. It feels like it was hard and productive and I don't hurt anywhere. Was that actually worth doing? Sure. When I go to do a 6 rep max on a preacher curl, how does that feel?
Like,
Kind of feels like shoulders are gonna pop off. Like,
right.
yeah, like you and I can sit here and talk about like, well, okay, let's think about this functionally, like fiber type. What kind of fiber types are going to be in your arms? What are they going to respond to? But these are things that inherently people know. And so I think people are looking for like some sort of like they're looking for confirmation bias within literature. And
Yeah,
when they find the opposite, it just totally derails them.
100%. And I've always thought the people I want to listen the most to, or maybe not the most to, but the people I want to consume their information from is the ones who think differently than me. Like, what can I learn from that? Because if I have a parrot saying all the same shit that I'm regurgitating,
Yeah.
I learn nothing. I just have a bunch of yes men around me. Awesome. It makes me feel like I know It's like working with an extremely genetically gifted bodybuilder. Everything I do with them works. I'm the smartest coach on the planet. No, bro. Anything's gonna work. My little
He's
brother.
gonna grow.
Right, right,
Yeah.
right, right. Like,
But like, how many people do we know that are so insecure that they don't have that learning mindset?
right. Yes, right.
And that comes from other parts of life.
Yeah, yes. And I think that's one of the reasons.
That's a favorite block.
Yeah, yeah. I fell such in love with John's training programs and methodologies, and when I began to work with him, because he was teaching me things that I'd never tried before. I'd never used chains. I'd never used bands. I'd never done lengthened partials. And what's really funny is if you look a decade ago, people were going to say 4 range of motion is going to give you the most muscle, Chris. Like you have to do it. If you're not doing 4 range of motion, you're a moron. And if you aren't doing progressive overload, you're getting smaller. Well, let me tell you this. The first time I ever did a triple drop set of lying leg curls with 20 partials at the end, I got off that machine and knew I was going to get better. I didn't need a study that just happened, 2 months ago to tell me, hey, Chris, like if you do that, your hamstrings are going to be better. No, I have fucking photos to prove it. My hamstrings went from flat to now they sit on my calves. Weird. What did I do? I trained less volume with hamstrings. I did harder intensity and I did intensity techniques. Weird.
Yeah. Funny how that works. You do something hard for the muscle and it grows.
Right. And then a side portion, you were talking about things that are cyclical, right? Like this is something I noticed. So you know how everyone's talking about like RIR, reps in reserve, right? Isn't that just 90s bodybuilding training?
Yeah. But now there's like a name to it, right?
Right, where you and I think, oh, let's go train. Like if I told you like, hey Danny, like it's the week of your show, like go there and just get a pump and do some fluffy shit and get out. To you, that's gonna say, hey, don't go anything, don't go to failure. Uh, I should probably lay off like anything hard, meaning deadlifts, barbell, rows, that kind of stuff, and just go in there and get a massive pump and get out in 60 minutes. That's bodybuilding in the 90s. It was
I was
go
gonna say, I literally take my peak weeks and I'm like, how would 90s bodybuilders approach their peak weeks? And that's exactly what I do. That's how I train my clients too for that particular week.
right. And what's funny is now they're like, well, reps in reserve do this. I'm like, they didn't need a study to tell you that. They said, huh, cool. If I eat my meals, I go get a big pump, and I don't really go so hard to where I'm so fatigued that I can't train the muscle again in 2 to 3, 4 days. Like, and I take all my supplements, I grow like a weed. Awesome.
I'm sitting here listening to you and I like want to go train right now.
And then, then it's like, oh, well, then what was the next wave of that? Dorian Yates. Okay, awesome. So that's logbook training, right? It's that's probably, I would say Dorian's probably the most intelligently thought out training program of the Olympia winners, right?
Yeah.
Very analytical, very much looking at like things that like Mike Munster studied and think, huh, like how can I make a muscle grow? Well, if I'm chasing a scoreboard, meaning reps and weight each week, I've got to get bigger and better, right? So, you know, I feel like I can look at that from a zoomed out lens and say, okay, cool. That's how that Mr. Olympia won it. But that's very different than the way Jay did it, and the way Ronnie did it, and the way Phil did it, where all of them probably have, in terms of genetic bias to gain and be incredible, they're on a similar playing field. So it goes back to the point you and I just said, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes ago, is that individual bias plays such a huge role.
Oh
And
my God.
what I said at the beginning about loving and having fun with training, if you think about this, anyone who's put on a considerable amount of muscle tissue, it takes 5 to 10 years at least. And if you aren't having fun, is the normal person going to stick with it? And I say no.
Completely agree.
Yeah.
And I think that like I'm really glad you segued into that because that's kind of what I was thinking about is like most people are never going to make it to the Olympia stage.
No,
And you sit here looking for methods that those guys used and kind of forget along the way that one of the biggest benefits to this is learning to trust ourselves as people, learning to grow as people. And how we do that, like if you're doing this sport and it's not making you better as a person, um, there's you probably need a different approach because we should always be looking to develop as people. And I know very few people who have developed to be better like versions of themselves by just doing what someone tells them to do rather than going through the process and having the ability to be introspective. I mean, that ability to be introspective is um that's carryover to so many other parts of life that I think are really important too. And again, we've talked about this on camera. One of my favorite parts about who you are as a coach, Chris, is that you love bodybuilding. You're awesome at it, right? But you also have not exchanged that for your ability to show up as a man, a leader, and a father in other parts of life. And your ability to come in and try things and think differently and think critically and use kind of different parts of your brain has probably carried over into how well you show up in other places.
oh, 1000%. And I feel like that's why I do speak so passionately against some of these people who try to just like live in this little box. And it's like, hey, there's so much more to learn within this. And I will always believe that what I've learned through bodybuilding carries over to other avenues in life, in business, and the development of my body along with my brain, and
Yeah.
it's, I've always had a hunger for learning. And I think sometimes people get confused by my posts and they think, oh, like this is just dumb meathead who tells us to rip weight, shoot drugs, and eat a bunch of food. And it's like, that's actually the opposite of the way I've approached my entire personal bodybuilding.
Yeah, yeah,
It,
yeah.
because I didn't grow
Yep.
fat. So I was forced to learn like the hard way when there wasn't this massive place where you could go and just find all the answers. It was like, for me, the answers were in that gym and I had to unlock it. You know what I mean? Like, and that to me, like, I remember walking the gym I used to go to when I was young, when I first started bodybuilding. You had to walk down these stairs and you could see the weight room in the floor, like the bottom of the building. And I always remember, like, the truth is somewhere in here. I just have to fucking find it. And, funny, fast forward, what's that, 21 years later, and I'm still trying to find
Yeah.
it.
But I mean, that's like that property of cognitive flexibility is kind of, I think, what people are really missing. Like big, big, big time.
That's a
Uh,
huge word, cognitive flexibility. I've never heard that. Yeah, I like that.
came up with it just now, like listening to
Good.
you talk. That's cognitive flexibility.
Yeah, put that shit on a shirt.
But I mean, really, like having the ability to, like the exploration process is the kind of thing that changes how your brain functions on like a neuronal network day to day. And I think is if we want to show up better as people, like I'll use myself as a prime example here. I'll kind of throw myself under the bus a little bit, not in like a bad way, but I was so like I don't even want to say results seeking, but like you coached me last year. How many days and times where did you get the feeling that I was so stuck on doing the right thing and doing it the right way and making sure that it was like, and it totally shut me down completely. How much do you think that hindered my ability to really grow as a person because it eroded my ability to actually like think and find a sense of freedom?
Right.
We get backed into a corner mentally, and when we get backed into a corner mentally, it's no different than like mentally putting a straitjacket on ourselves. It doesn't feel good compared to like if we walk outside, all of a
Yep.
sudden we can feel a little bit more. And I think that having those two different like viewpoints of ways of going through life, how we train and how we approach training very much can lead us down one of those paths. And one feels really, really good and allows us to grow and actually enjoy the thing we're doing. And the other constantly puts us up against, I'm not enough, I don't know enough, I don't there's a mistrust there. And the reality is this is going to take more fucking time than people think it's going to take anyway. You're not going to know in 4 weeks if you've got it figured out, or 6 weeks if you've got it figured out. And if you're looking for that, you're going to burn out really, really quick.
I have this conversation with so many of my competitors that are 35 plus. Is there the ones who are inflexible I always try to encourage them. I'm like, you have to look at your training like water. It has to adapt the shape that it's in. And right now, your body is the bottle that we're putting water in. And I was just talking to one of my pros this morning, and he was like, Chris, like, what do you think about barbell rows? And I'm like, as a whole or like as an exercise, because
Yeah.
anyway,
Context.
right. And I said, for your upper back, great. For your erectors, incredible. I said, for your lats, not so much. And I said, speaking for you specifically, I worry more about the damage your spine might have to occur to move the loads you're going to have to move because he's 265 pounds, right?
We'll be rolling many, many, many plates.
Right. And his spine is like this. And I said to him, I said, man, like, I think there are better options for you for improving your back. And he's like, well, what if I just did it like every other week? And I said, I don't think you can go to the chiropractor enough to do that. And he's like, and I was like, that's a joke, by the way. I said, it's the years of loading 700 pounds on your back as a power lifter that puts you in a position where that's no longer a feasible exercise for you.
Yeah.
And I think that's really hard for some people to come to terms with because again, you may put on a video on Instagram, you see like Derek's lungs for like ripping underhand barbell rows, and you're like, okay, cool, that's one of the best backs in the world. I should do that. Okay, that works for him. Like, I
Yeah.
need you to think like, okay, cool, you're 40 plus, and is that the right thing for you in this moment of time? Would that have been right for you when you were 25? Maybe. But right now it's not. And I know that can be very hard because listen, it was not easy for me to walk away from barbell squatting. I love that shit. I was good at it. But I knew if I wanted to function and be able to probably walk when I was 45, that was no longer going to be a great option for me. And that, hey,
Yeah.
reverse band hack squatting, leg press, all great options. Bulgarian split squats destroys my quads. Um, so that's a huge point and topic that I think that more people, as the longer they stay in this, they have to realize that what once worked for you has to adapt. And
Yeah.
even through different phases of your year, that might have to be that way, right? Like, I think that's what you probably learned through that hellacious contest prep is, hey, if I'd have maybe been a little bit more flexible with my mindset and not married so much to here are my lifts that track if I'm on the right path, and I abandon those for things in my body saying, hey, like we need to do this, or this may be a better option in the moment, as opposed to like, Chris, motherfucker, I gotta win this, I gotta win Chicago, and you won Chicago, like cool. Now I'm competing against the best women in the world. We gotta do this, and this, right? And I have to be this strength and I have to move this load. Okay. Maybe not.
I think the thing that really held me back last year, mindset wise, was embracing the mindset that I had to feel like trash. And so the more worse I felt, and again, like this is different. Like I was having seizures twice a week. Like that's different, right? And I just embraced like, well, I'm just gonna have to feel bad. Like, no, there are other things that needed to be managed there.
Right.
But like just with there's so much you said with regards to different solutions and things like that that I really want to just as a therapist, again, like as a PT, as a coach, like what I do, people ask me what I do, and I'm like, I kind of convince you can have it all. But
Yes.
there are different ways to do that, right? So like even for you, could we get you barbell back squat again? Hell yeah, I could definitely get that back to you. And especially physically. But one way that people can think about this is number one, there's a goal orientation, right? So is it worth it for you to want to do that again? If someone comes to me and they say, hey, deadlifting's not great for me, but I want to do it again, great, we can do that, but there's going to be an exchange with that.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. I think one way that I approach things generally with people is through the idea of a movement being high exchange versus high support. Now, if you want to do a lot of high exchange based movements or you want to get back to doing something that you shouldn't do, we can definitely do that. It means that there need to be some support mechanisms brought into place through training, right? I'm not talking low load. I'm talking like, okay, well, if you want a barbell squat, where's the limiting factor? Is it your spine? Okay, if it's your spine, what else can we do in training to support that? How about we look at hack squatting and really looking at your bracing strategy, make them slow tempo. So you have to control every inch of that from your brace. But I think again, that's where I want to come back to the idea of a hierarchy, where multiple things can be true at once and how much things are going to change. And something that may be a high support movement isn't always going to be a high support movement. Because once you get really good at bracing, okay, well then what's the next hang up? Is it control through the bottom? Is it output? Is it so I don't know. I just like again, like I've got a system that I use that's kind of beyond this, but I do think it's important just to recognize for people that they can do certain movements like a barbell row,
Right.
but it's a higher exchange based movement. And the more high exchange movements they have in, they need to counter that with a high support.
Right. Yeah, that's the yin and yang, right?
Talk
Like,
about recovery, like I'm
yep,
not talking about like going to your chiropractor support because to me that's passive
right.
and it's not going to actually move you forward.
Correct. And you know what's really interesting is I know everyone is searching for the right way or the
Mhm.
best way. And if that was the case, you could walk into any gym and watch any trainer put someone through a workout and it should be the same, right? Right.
Oh, that's a great point. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
If this is it, no one else should be able to make money on it. I've put out the blueprint, go. Right. And that's what I've always thought. Like
That's such a good way of thinking about it.
because again, I've been very fortunate to be around a lot of people who have gotten client results, not how I would have done it. And
Yeah.
instead of being like, bullshit, like that was luck, fill in the blank, good genetics, I'm just like, there's multiple ways to do this shit. Like
Yeah.
my way is right for you, or it may not be. And very similar to my coaching style. Like some people may relate to the more abrasive, in your face, bullet point, the way I coach. And then other people like Chris, like, no, I need you to, that's not what I need. I'm like, cool, great. Like you can still learn from my YouTube, but we won't work together. And that doesn't make you a bad client. It just means my style doesn't work for you. And I, I think I kind of view it that all that way is if we can have an open mind together, like what
Mhm.
could we create is a much more positive spin as opposed to, hey, you're an idiot. Your anecdotal evidence means nothing. This study shows me what I need to do. And I actually had a decent conversation with a young guy who reached out to me. I made one of those silly memes and he like DM'd me and I was like, if you turn off your abrasive mindset, I'll have a conversation with you. And it eventually led to, because I said, look, when you mature, you'll realize in 20 years, 10 years, that there's more than one way to do things.
Mhm.
And I said, you don't understand that now. And he goes, yeah, but you're the old meathead and I'm the young science kid, and we'll never see alike. And I said, you know what? Here's where we see alike. We both want to put the most amount of muscle on as possible. That's the first commonality. Step two, the methodology we may get there, or methodology we may get there, it may be very different. But if you break it down, a lot of the methodologies that we'll use are probably very, very similar. The exercise selection, the exercise order, the sequencing may be different. The rep ranges, the tempos, all may be different. But at the end of the day, like we're still walking out of the gym trying to progress the way I see progression and the way you do. If not,
Yeah.
why would we do this?
Right, right. Oh, I love what you did there.
Yeah,
One question I like to ask myself all the time when working with someone else or wanting to have a discussion and they're a little resistant is what good could come of this?
right. Yeah,
Good
yep.
could come of this that would allow other people to flourish. Because I think when people when we can turn our eyes up
Yes.
and recognize that we're all moving the same direction or trying to, it becomes much less about protecting our viewpoint and protecting our way of doing things and much more about how does this get even better?
Right. And I think that a good topic for next time or a segue into it, like I'm going to go back to how I was brought up with this sport is I always felt very insecure about my physique. So I always felt like my knowledge was ahead of where I was physically presenting.
Yeah.
So I always listened more. And when someone spoke who was bigger and better than me or had trained more people than me and had more success either on a bodybuilding stage or in the gym, I always thought instead of trying to come up with a rebuttal to what they were saying, take in, absorb what they're saying, and seeing how I can use it for my benefit, and then share an idea that I thought if it was the right time for me to speak. Because early on with John, I did a lot of listening. And then once I began to build confidence in my own self, begin to like push back on some things and be like, hey, can you explain this to me? Like, what's your thought process? How do you see this? Why do you see this? Where did you learn this technique, or what made you come to this conclusion? Because I see it this way. And then a lot of times, like you and I, we see it different, but it's the same ending. So
Yeah.
it's very similar when I told you I was having shoulder issues, and I said, you know what? I don't know the reasoning, but it feels really great to hang from a pull-up bar in between sets of chest. And you're like, yeah, no shit, Chris, because, and then you gave me this long answer. I did it
I,
because logically it made sense to me.
yeah. I mean, it's isn't that simple though?
Yes.
Like it can be that simple. It really can. And I think you and I are very much on the same kind of mission, for lack of a better word, to just lend clarity to what can otherwise feel like chaos. No one likes going to the gym. Like we're all going to the gym to try to be better and like should be a positive. Like even if like let's be real, even if we're using it as an outlet to deal with some negative stuff, the
Right.
gym is in and of itself something that we want to use to make us better. So why are we letting it be anything otherwise? And we do have a choice over that. And it's a very simple mindset shift.
Yep. Agreed. I think that's a great way to end this episode one here. We have a bunch of different talking points that we both have jotted down. But in the comment section below, if anyone wants to hear us talk about a certain thing, whether that be science or bro or somewhere in the middle, post it. We will definitely delve into it, because this is merely the tip of the iceberg in my mind of the conversation that needs to be presented for in my mind, the ultimate progress, because that's what we're all chasing is in my mind, at least, like, how can I help the most people, including myself, get bigger and better and leaner and, just look freaky on stage with less injuries.
Yeah. Yeah.
Both internally and up here.
This is the harder one, if we're honest.
Right, right. That may be out of the scope of our practice.
I think
But
that actually might be something we should talk about in an episode because I've done a little digging this year about there's some wild stuff that happens epigenetically. Really, really cool.
right. Agreed. Agreed. All right. Until next time, Chris, Danny, we are done with episode one.